You're listening to Chillworthy,
a podcast where two best friends discuss mysteries, murders, and anything in between for your enjoyment.
So if you're ready to hear some chilling and unsettling cases, you're in the right place. Happy listening.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
How you doing?
Fine. It's majorly humid out there.
Yes, it is awful. I feel like every time I come in from outside, it's like I'm stepping out of a sauna back into air.
Right, and I told you it is completely a first world problem, but my ice machine broke.
Oh, that's the worst.
I miss ice.
Of course.
So-
Of course. You know, I fill all drinking receptacles up. Like if it's a cup with a lid, I will literally fill it so high with ice, I can't then shut the lid, hence increasing all of my chances to spill, which I certainly do constantly.
Sounds counterproductive.
Right, but I have to have as much ice as possible. I cannot be without it. So I feel your pain.
Well, hopefully it'll be here tomorrow
Well, good.
in the mail.
Then you're going to go crazy. Wild.
I mean, I do miss it a
Of
lot.
course.
So,
Of course.
we're not really sure what order this will be in anymore. So I'm going to stop saying like, welcome to the 4th episode, because this could be the 6th for all I know.
Exactly. And we're not sure if we're going to do the every other either and stay consistent with that. There might be 3 of Brent, none for me for a while.
No, it's going to be loosey-goosey, and that's fine.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Turkey lurkey.
Right. Henny Penny.
Those of you who know Golden Girls references, buckle up.
So having said that, I am going to dig into a case today. I decided to go abroad again. So it's going to be a little rough in terms of name pronunciation and stuff like that, but I'm going to give it my best shot.
Absolutely.
So before we get started, just doing our little typical disclaimer, I just wanted to say that in the age of the internet, there is a bunch of conflicting information out there.
Right.
So, while we have been researching, obviously we're going to come across things that may or may not be completely accurate.
Despite our due diligence.
All right, so let's jump right in then. This case is all about, yet again, another disappearance of someone by the name of Frauke Liebs.
Beautiful name.
From Germany. So she was a 21-year-old nursing student, and she went missing in June of 2006 in a town called Paderborn. And from what I saw, it's a very perplexing and haunting unsolved case to this day.
Yikes. Unsolved.
So a little bit of the background. Frauke Liebs was born February 21st, 1985 in Paderborn, which is a city in western Germany. So at the time of her disappearance, she was living in a shared apartment with her roommate, who I think was an ex-boyfriend, I think.
Red flag. Red flag.
So, and I know you said red flag, but I don't think that they had a bad relationship. Like, they were still roommates, and I think they were pretty good friends at this point.
Well,
so
good for them.
From what I gather.
All right.
So
good.
All right. So now we come to the night of the disappearance. So it's June 20th, 2006. Typical evening, but there was a little bit of added excitement because the World Cup was happening and it was being hosted by Germany. So the country was buzzing with football fever, which I've never had.
Well, technically this was soccer fever, but to them
it was football
correct,
fever. Yes.
Correct. You've never had either, I guess.
Absolutely not.
Right.
None of those sport ball things.
Sport ball.
So she's watching this. She went out with her friends to a pub called the Old Triangle, and it's spelled AULD.
Like that song on in the Sex and the City movie on New Year's Eve.
Right.
Yes.
So I don't know how you actually pronounce it. I think it's old, like the
Old.
Old Triangle, but maybe old.
Who
I
the
don't
hell
know.
knows? Right.
So she's she's watching this. It's England versus Sweden in this Irish pub in Paderborn, which is a city in Western Germany.
Okay.
So this was a very popular spot, and especially during the World Cup, like it was filled with a bunch of people enjoying the game, and it was very like festive attitude. So she was last seen leaving the pub around 11 p.m. When she was intending to walk home.
Most unsafe on foot.
So the match ended in a 2-2 draw, whatever, sounds like Uno to me. And Frauke's friends noticed that she seemed a bit tired, and so she decided to head home. So she leaves the pub. It's 11 p.m. She's intending to walk back to her apartment, which isn't very far away, and she assured her friends that she'd be fine walking by herself. This happens to be the last time anyone sees her alive.
Shame on them. Most incidents happen less than a mile from home. I think that statistic is actually car accidents, but it doesn't matter. Safety first.
Well, and I don't know. I sort of disagree with shame on them. I mean, if she's the one that's saying she wants to go home, what? They're supposed to not let her leave?
I don't know. I kind of want to say shame on them. I'm thinking back to college.
Not kind of. You did.
Well, I did. I said what I said.
You said it.
I'm thinking back to college times, and I can't imagine anyone in my group ever allowing, we never did that. You were never permitted to be by yourself walking around, especially at night, especially after drinking.
I doubt you could even stand most of these nights.
Well, they wouldn't let me crawl alone.
Fine.
Now granted, we didn't all run in the same circles. We had our circle, but then there would be, I had friends that maybe the other girls didn't, and vice versa. But if you knew that you were going to be with them, and not to say that you can't be by yourself, but you can't be by yourself if...
Well, it sounds like that's exactly what you are saying, and you've said it multiple times at this point.
Then, yeah, that's it. I maintain it.
So shame on them.
Yes, shame on them.
From your perspective, not from mine.
Correct.
All right. Anyway, okay. Like I said, she was never seen again. So she did not return home that night. And her roommate, Chris, initially thought that she might have stayed out with other friends or something. But as the hours passed and no word from her, his concern began to grow. And I think I also read in this research that he was actually at the pub too for a while with her. He had a recently new girlfriend that he was leaving to hang out with. So he went home far before she went home.
She did not walk, the new girlfriend did not walk alone unsupervised after she left.
I don't think the girlfriend was there. I think he was leaving to go hang out with her. So now we're at the next morning. Frauke's family and friends are starting to get pretty worried because it was not like her to not inform anybody of her whereabouts, and her phone was not on.
Did I ever tell you the story? This is a prime example. May I just share? So when I was in college, I had a cell phone, and this was, the beginning days of cell phones, Nokia's. Not that matters, but
I had a Razor, and God, I loved it.
Yes, my roommate had a Razor. She also loved it.
I loved to just snap that sucker shut.
So one night we all went out, and I got pretty toasted.
No.
And I lost my phone. So these were the days of actual landline phones. So we had a landline in our room. So unbeknownst to me, a nice boy out in the city found my phone, went in my contacts, because, this was before screens locked or anything like that.
Yeah.
He found my phone, looked up my mom in my contacts, and called her and said, I found this phone. I'm assuming it's your son or daughter. So I did not tell my mom I lost my phone.
Again, I'm shocked.
So my mom calls our room phone. So I answer, and we're talking, and she's like, so, how's your... Not that she said, how was your cell phone, but something... checking in on its well-being. And I'm like, oh, you're fine. Everything's fine. And she's like, oh, yeah? Shami.
Right.
So she tells me that this boy called. So the jig was up. I was caught. So she gives me the guy's information. I call him. Now, he answered. He was a sweetheart. And he's like, so there was a city nearby where we went out to a lot where the bars and stuff were and the clubs. So I was very scared that he was going to kill me and very nervous about this. So the plan was that I was going to meet him by a museum and this was going to be in broad daylight.
Absolutely.
Right. But the group that went with me that insisted on coming with me, granted, I was very fearful and I'm over the top with this kind of stuff. But like the point of bringing this example up is I was not drunk. Nobody was drinking. This was broad daylight. This was before dinner time. And we still traveled in a pack to go meet this boy to give me my cell phone back. So, you know what I mean? I was not going to be alone for that either.
Oh, yeah. Okay. But that's more of a you thing, I think.
It is more of a me thing, but I also wasn't begging them to come with me or like it was insisted upon. I'm not going by myself. We're all going to go do this together. Who knows what this guy's about? Like,
okay. Well, I mean, very respectable.
Well, I'm just saying they should not have let her walk.
Yeah, you have made your point.
Well, okay.
And I know what your viewpoint is.
Well, and she still has yet to come home, so I rest my case.
You indeed do.
Okay.
All right. Like you said, she has yet to come home. So Chris, the roommate, and her family decide that they're obviously going to report her missing to the police on June 21st, 2006. So the police took the report seriously due to Frauke's nature of basically, being reliable and coming home when she says she is and that kind of thing. So they started search efforts, which included checking local hospitals, contacting her friends, retracing her steps from the pub to her apartment. They put up flyers with her picture that were distributed. Local media was informed. So despite all these efforts, there were no immediate leads. And the lack of any sign of struggle or any type of clues at all to her whereabouts only made this case more confusing, I guess. So now, one of the things that is pretty interesting about this case is that a bunch of phone calls do come in from Frauke herself.
Yikes.
Right. So first, the first phone call comes in June 21st, 2006, which is a Wednesday. And it comes in at 12:49 a.m. And she calls her roommate, Chris, and she said she would come home later, and she sounded calm. And Chris noted nothing like unusual in her tone of voice. So obviously she doesn't come home, though. Then second call, she calls the next day at basically 11 p.m. And Frauke now calls her mother, Hildegard, which I actually like that name.
I do not, but tomato.
Right. And she said that she was safe and she would come home soon, but she, again, did not provide any specific details about her whereabouts. Then we have the next day, June 23rd, and this is, again, it's 11:04 p.m. now. Frauke calls her brother, Frank.
Frank.
I think it's Frank, but... The conversation, again, very brief, and Frauke reassures him that she's fine and she would be back home soon. Then we have the fourth call, June 24th, 2006, 5:50 p.m. So Frauke speaks this time to her sister, Karen. Just, again, she reassures these family members that she's like, okay, and she'll be home soon. But again, it's all on her terms. Like, she's calm, sort of detached, but won't entertain a conversation with these people. It's only she's calling them almost like she's like reading from a script that someone gave her.
Was it a thing back then, do you know, where calls could be traced from cell phones or no?
Yes.
Because I'm wondering, is she just doing this where she isn't at liberty to obviously get into details? I mean, she is certainly not sounding panicked like you're saying, but I'm wondering, was she doing it, and especially that she was calling so many different people, that she was doing it to try to, like, send a message discreetly, flying under the radar of, like, maybe one of these calls could be tracked?
I don't know how, I mean, saying she was abducted or something. I mean, how discreetly can one be when they're calling a relative? I mean, obviously the person knew she was doing this, so I don't know. So then we have the next phone call, June 25th. This is at 11:30 p.m. She calls her mother. This call was very similar to the previous ones. Frauke assured her mom that she would come home soon. And again, very calm demeanor, but still not like natural. So then on June 26th, again, it's 11:29 p.m. Frauke calls her roommate Chris again. She sounded very tired, reassured him she would come home. When Chris pressed her for more information, Frauke was very elusive and did not disclose her location. And I read somewhere that I think it was on this last phone call, actually. So the last phone call takes place June 27th, which is a Tuesday, 11:01 p.m. And Frauke is talking, I think, to her roommate, but it might have been her brother. Again, I know I said this in the last episode, but there's a lot of differing information out there.
Of course.
Online. So, this is what I have gathered, but I can't say it's completely accurate. So she actually this time did sound different. She was like distressed and kind of crying a little bit. And whether it was her brother or her roommate, I'm not sure who she was speaking to, but they did ask her at one point if she was being like held hostage by someone. And she very like weakly said yes, like real weakly, and then instantly was like, no. So, I mean, that's pretty suspicious.
I'm so sorry if you said this and I missed it. Right. These phone calls to people were coming from her cell phone directly. Not okay.
Yep. But I think whenever they would try to call back, it would always go to. So it was like the cell phone was like only on during these times, and then I guess it was just turned off, which maybe again is so that it can't be traced. I don't know.
Which also makes me wonder. You had made the comment earlier based off of something that I said. You responded with like, if she had been abducted or kidnapped, that the kidnapper was with her and around her, and, she wasn't at liberty to say certain things. But I'm wondering, would this person like step out or something? So then she did have these like small little opportunities to reach out to people. But you would also think if you're kidnapping someone, you're going to make damn sure they don't have access to their own cell phone. And also for how long this went on for, just charging. You would think the phone would have died eventually, but who knows?
But, I mean, if you are only turning it on for like 20 minutes a day.
True, I guess. Guess it depends on the health of the battery.
You got that right. Now, one thing that I know in terms of like the content of some of these calls, one of the things was the first time that she called her roommate, Chris, when she called him, when she was on the phone with him, she called him by his full name, which was Christos.
Uh-huh.
And she only ever used that, like his full name, when she was mad at him. So people were wondering if that was like a subtle like sign of like something's not right.
Right,
I just
trying
want you
to
to
tell
know.
him that. Yes.
So that was something that people have made note of while they trying to like dissect these phone calls. And again, like we said, obviously all the phone calls were brief. So I would assume it was so that they couldn't necessarily be traced easily. I don't know. Another thing that was very consistent with all these phone calls was that she did not provide any specific details. Sometimes she would say she was in, what was the town I said?
Started with a P.
Paderborn. So sometimes she would say she was in Paderborn, but wouldn't say where or like anything like that. So every time she called, her family continued to get more worried. Now the thing was, people were also saying, well, maybe she was calling because whoever did take her was trying to keep it not as much of a missing persons case for as long as possible, because like you're calling,
right, it's still her voice,
right, like you're not kind of, I don't know, like maybe going full force into really trying to find this girl as much. Like,
absolutely.
I don't know.
If you were going to report that, when you think about it, it's like what you're describing would be absolutely concerning and worrisome for friends and family. But if you called a police station to report this, they would be like, well, you just talked to her.
Right.
Like, we're not going to do anything with this yet.
Right. So, and that, that could be one of the reasons why someone had her continue to call the way she did. So the police did monitor these calls and they tried to trace them, but each call was too brief to pinpoint an exact location. So it appeared to them like it was evident at this point that she was being held somewhere against her will, but that she was being forced or coerced into making these calls to, I don't want to say throw them off the trail, but make it seem like a little less like
emergent
dire
level. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Obviously, during this time, she's alive and communicating to these people, but basically offering no assistance as to where she was. Then we have the date of October 4th, 2006. Now, this is months and months after that last phone call.
Right, from the summer.
Obviously, her family now is extremely worried. And sadly, on October 4th, 2006, they did discover her body. Which obviously brought a very sad ending to this search. So her remains were found by a hunter. Hunters seem to get a lot of action in these stories.
Worse luck, though. Wrong place, wrong time for these discoveries.
Wasn't it right place, right time? I would assume, but...
But in terms of wrong, I guess wrong.
Yeah, no, please explain it. I'd like to hear.
Well, first I was going to say, no, you're right. Oh, no. Actually, right place, wrong time. No. Wrong place, right time. No, none of the. My point, what I was trying to articulate was these poor people, they're not certainly wanting to stumble upon these deceased people. And it's awful that happens.
All right. So regardless of whether it was the right or wrong place and the right or wrong time.
Right.
So her remains were found by a hunter in a remote forested area about 20 kilometers from Paderborn. And this location was very secluded. So it was actually pretty unlikely that her body would have been stumbled across unless there was a deliberate search in that area. So, but by the time Frauke's body was discovered, it was significantly decomposed. So it made it sort of challenging for forensic experts to determine the exact cause of her death. But there were no immediate signs of severe trauma that would have just tried to plainly explain how she died right off the bat.
Can I ask a question quickly?
Sure.
Okay. Do we know how they actually were able to identify the remains since they were so deeply decomposed?
It's like you ran out of gas there right at the end. Yes. Because they were able to identify her by her clothes because sadly she was still in the exact same outfit.
From the night that she went out for the soccer football situation at the bar that nobody, may I say, walked her home from.
Right.
Good God. Same exact outfit.
Yep. Yes, that's how they identified her. Which, obviously makes it sound like she was certainly being held somewhere because she wasn't voluntarily not coming home and just not changing her clothes.
Exactly. Awful. Awful.
So they analyzed or did their best to analyze some of these phone calls that were made during the time of her disappearance. So what they ended up thinking was, again, like I said, it was believed that she was being held captive and that her abductor allowed her or forced her to make these calls to prevent an immediate search for her escalating. And they were able to trace some of the calls. And when they did, they were traced to different locations within Paderborn, suggesting that she and her captor were mobile.
The move.
Right. She wasn't always in the same place. And like I said before, because of how short the phone calls were, that's why they couldn't get the exact location. Like I said, that was what happened after they analyzed these phone calls and stuff. And sadly, yes, her remains were discovered. So now these are the theories / the speculation of what might have happened to her. So the first one is that she was held by somebody that she knew. So one of the most prevalent theories was that Frauke was held captive by somebody that she knew, and this theory stems from like the calm demeanor that she displayed during those phone calls, which suggested that she might have felt somewhat like familiar or not as threatened by a complete stranger.
Right. Like it wasn't good, but not necessarily alarm level in terms of her reaction or her, like you said, demeanor.
Right.
When she would reach out to friends and family.
And the lack of immediate distress in her communications might indicate again that she was like cooperating with somebody and that she felt partially safe. And the locations from which the calls were made were from within Paderborn, where Frauke was familiar with, suggesting that again it could have been somebody that she knew from one of Frauke's like maybe normal daily or weekly routines. I don't know. And when you think about it, I mean, when she left that pub that evening, obviously in one way it was good and in one way it was bad, but when she left, it was a big, sports ball event happening.
Sports ball, yes.
So there were a lot of people around, which semi means safety in a way.
Correct.
But also if somebody, tossed her into a car or held her, at gunpoint and told her to get in, like how many people are going to notice a 21-year-old getting into a car on a busy street during a big sports game where people are drinking? Like nobody would just take notice to that.
Right.
So then, which brings us to this theory of like an opportunistic crime, where it basically is saying that it was just wrong place, wrong time.
Got it.
For her.
Not the hunters.
Right. So where it was just like a random abduction. She's walking on a busy street. Somebody takes notice of her, thinks that they have this opportunity, grabs it, / her, and off they go.
Right.
And then, again, with this one, where it's like an opportunistic crime, the fact that these phone calls were coming in from various locations could have been that, she was being kept even in like a van or something, like going back and forth to different places.
True. Were they able to tell where she was found, if that was like a second location or they don't even know how she died, correct? They aren't sure.
Yeah, I don't think they know.
Yeah.
So what did you make of the fact that most of these calls happened at the same time, or relatively around the same time, mostly like 10:30 to 11:30 at night?
I maintain that the abductor was not there, that there was some routine, which is sloppy in itself. And what's even sloppier is like what I had touched on, that if you're going to abduct somebody, I would think you would be damn sure they don't have access to any phone, never mind their own phone. Their own phone is going to have all of their contacts. Who has phone numbers generally memorized anymore? Back then, I mean, I definitely remember having numbers memorized more so back during that time.
Okay, but I have to challenge you on something. Unless,
go for it.
I will. Unless I'm hearing you incorrectly. What are you telling me over there that you think she was able to sneak these phone calls out but give them no information as to where she was?
That's a good question. And I see how that makes no sense.
Because you're sitting over there nodding very seriously as I said that to you.
I agree. No, that does not make any sense.
You're saying somebody
in
just...
terms of they stepped out quickly. She doesn't know how long they're going to be gone for. It's very hard for me to believe, like I keep repeating, if you're kidnapping someone, you're going to make sure they don't have access to call or text anybody, never mind from their own phone, where they're going to have like an endless supply of their contacts in there. If they had access to some other random phone that wasn't theirs, they would only be able to obviously make calls if they had the numbers memorized. So if she still has access to her own cell phone, they're not putting her up to calling, which is probably more so what's accurate. If they're stepping out, like my original theory, she's making these quick phone calls. Maybe she's being more vague because she's not sure when they're going to come back. But if you're on the phone, you're on the phone. If your captor comes in and you're on the phone with, it doesn't matter who the hell you're on the phone with. I'd imagine they're going to hit the roof, and that could mean the end of you. And basically what you're challenging me with. It's like if you have the capability of making these calls and you're even alone for 10
Every
seconds.
night for 7 nights.
Right. You're going to be damn sure you're getting something across to someone that you're talking to. And that they're answering the phone. It's not like these calls are going missed from Frauke. Thank you. I couldn't remember how to pronounce her name. So I think what probably makes more sense is, I assume what you're alluding to, is that the captor is making her call. Well, and I also really agreed with something you said earlier about the point of these calls. You know, the calls were obviously not, like there was no way to confirm in great detail where she was in this city. They couldn't narrow that down. They're still hearing her voice, that she was the one making the calls herself. And it's like that this person knew enough to kind of make that happen so then no one could report it. Maybe that they would report it, but that the police weren't going to actively start an investigation, because what is there to investigate? You're hearing from her. You're hearing from her herself. So I think that was definitely sharp of them. And that they probably were monitoring her and telling her what to say, which is why it was so limited.
Right. Yes.
Info.
I just respectfully disagree with that first theory.
I disagree with myself.
That you threw out.
Thank you.
Sure. Now, while you were explaining that, if you are interested, I did find a transcript of one of the phone calls between her and Chris. Now, I don't know which day this happened, but she called. Chris says, "Why did you leave?" I think he just means, like, why haven't you come home, basically. And she says, "You know that, Chris." Doesn't make a lot of sense. But Chris then says, "Are you being held?" She says, "Yes," like I said, faintly. And then louder, she says, No. Chris says, "You know that the police are looking for you." And she says, "Yes, I've been away for a week." Chris then asks, "Who's with you?" She says, "I can't say." Chris says, "No, did you meet another guy?" Frauke says, "You have to know that I haven't been staying away for a week because I met another guy. Come on, you know me." Then she asks him, "Are mom and dad with you?" He says, "They were here." She then says, "Tell them I love them very much." Chris says, "Should I come pick you up?" Frauke says, "No, that won't do." Chris says, "Can we meet somewhere?" Frauke says, "That won't do." Chris says, "Where are you?" She then says the word mama. That's it. Chris says, "Where are you?" She again says mama. Chris says, "Where are you?" again, and she again says mama. So then Chris says, "Are you afraid to come home?" She says no. Chris says, "We'll clean up your apartment and nobody will ask you what happened. Just come home." Which I'm assuming is he was trying to keep it really low pressure, thinking she still might have had the choice to come home. You know, like he's like, "We're not even going to ask you where you were. Just like come back."
I see what you're saying. Yes.
So kind of like how I talk to you sometimes when I want to make plans with you. Like, just no pressure. Let's just do it. Let's just try. Let's see. Could we go here maybe? Think about it. Right. So again, she says that won't do. He says, "Are you with one or more people?" She says, "Please don't ask me. I'd like to be with you all. I'd like to come home." He says, "When will you call again?" She says, "I'm not sure." He tells her to please call every day. She says, "I will. Ciao. Bye for now."
That went on way longer than I was expecting it to. I'm sure it really wasn't that long.
Right.
But more was said than I expected there to be. I don't know. I really don't know what to think. And then I'm thinking, was this initially by choice and then things went awry? It makes me wonder if Chris knows who she could possibly have been with. I'm sure he would have shared any sort of possibility with the police.
And there were multiple times where Chris got because of course he was somebody who was looked at first. But there were multiple times where he received the phone call from her in the company of like her sister or her parents.
Okay.
So like he was ruled out pretty quick then that he wasn't the one holding her
hostage,
captive or whatever.
Right.
The only thing, the only other thing in terms of a theory was that the police at one point did try to tie her disappearance to someone named Wilfred and Angelica. and they were a divorced couple. They were living, I guess, pretending to be a brother and sister in a town called Hawkster. And what they would do is, like, and I guess this was happening around the same time of her disappearance, which is why they were trying to
connect
them.
the two.
But what these two people would do is they would put out something called Lonely Hearts ads in the newspaper, and it was an attempt to lure victims basically to their house to abuse, torture, and murder them. And the town that they lived in was only 34 miles away from Paderborn, where Frauke was last seen, and 30 miles away from where her body was discovered, and 14 miles away from where one of the calls were traced back to. Because, like I said, the calls came in from a bunch of different places. But the police never did actually find any physical evidence tying her to this bizarre couple doing this stuff.
Operation. Yeah.
Right, which, I mean, obviously they got caught or we
Thank
wouldn't know
goodness.
about them.
Right.
But, you know, I think that was a theory for a while, but they just couldn't actually trace it back. But I think I'm always fascinated with disappearances where it's not just a disappearance and it's done. You know, like, I can see by your face you don't.
I don't.
Like with Sandra Hughes, she disappears, but then people see her.
Right.
Frauke Liebs, she disappears.
Yes, the phone
people
calls.
are getting phone calls
Yes.
from her. Like,
Yes.
I find that so fascinating versus somebody who just all of a sudden they disappear and then that's it.
Right.
Not that those cases obviously can't be fascinating because of what you find or what evidence, but
I get what you're saying, though.
I just think it adds that extra like layer of like eeriness to it. Like
Mystery.
You're kind of gone, but you're not completely gone. Mm-hmm. So
Agreed. And you would think those things would possibly make it more probable that they would be found, but not at least in these two cases, and
Yeah.
I'm sure many others. But
and then you wonder if, you know, if this had happened like now, would the technology be better to find her with those phone calls? Would she even have been allowed to make those phone calls? I mean, with just the way that phones are now compared to then.
true.
And
Not as
you know,
simplistic.
right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. Or would there have been like more CCTV footage on
Very
like
good point.
a busy street?
From that bar. Good
Right.
point. Good
ATMs,
point. Right.
gas stations, etc.
Exactly. Very good point.
So,
Oh, very sad. Very, very sad.
but if we take any lessons from this, it's that, you know, you knew what you were doing back in college.
All I'm saying is
I'm serious.
they should not have let her leave by herself. And that's all I have to say. I feel what I'm about to say, I am not at all trying to make light of.
That's all I have to say. Now, what I'm about to say, go ahead. What is it?
I'm not trying to make light of how this ended,
Well, of course not.
but I'm happy that her family could at least have the closure to be able to bury their daughter. But the fact that, you know, there's basically, like, yes, there was closure in that way, but there's still so much unknown compared to never finding her body, really, truly never knowing the finality of things. But totally
Well, that's why I
devastating no
think the
matter
Sandra
what.
Hughes one. They're
Yes.
completely opposite in
Yes.
that way. She's just
Who knows?
yes,
Literally.
right. Because, you know, haven't there been stories of people who are out hiking and, I mean, God forbid they do get abducted by like mountain people and are like held like that? I mean, I could have sworn I've heard stories like that.
I've certainly read books like that.
All right, well,
I mean, you can't put anything past humanity. Anything horrible and just, I feel like the worst we can imagine, I'm sure, has happened.
yeah.
So, unfortunately, anything is possible in a horribly
I guess
negative
I
way.
guess what I'm saying is what you had agreed with before. It's like we don't actually know that Sandra, for instance, is dead,
True.
but the likelihood is obviously high.
Yeah.
The little boy thinks she is.
He sure does.
So,
Caden.
you know, Right. I know that that's not the story we're talking about right now, but
Just
it's yes, because it is a different, like, both of them are probably very unnerving, but knowing that the person was found does bring has to bring some sense of closure that other cases do not.
Right. I mean, with the Sandra case, the hope of, oh my gosh, could she still be alive, has to get people through days, I would imagine. But then also your mind can go in the other direction of thinking of all the horrible things that could
what
have
could she
happened
be
to
going
her. Yes.
What could she be going through? What,
Yes.
like, yeah, that stuff, that's not good.
No.
So before we close, I want to give all the listeners a little heads up that you may or may not have noticed sometimes through some of these episodes that there's a bit of an odd way we have of speaking. Now, currently Talia has been taking the lead on that, but in normal circumstances, I do talk with the same amount of peculiarities as she.
You participate.
Right, absolutely.
A willing participant.
Yes, we've built this
Twin talk, I like
from the
to
ground
call
up.
it.
And so anyway, what the reason I'm bringing this up is because we do want to do an upcoming mini bonus episode that is basically will act like a glossary for the listeners to help them
Decipher,
translate, and understand some of the things that we say, because when we are together, I do feel like our IQ drops about 20 points. And
facts.
Right, and we have really been trying to hold it together.
I bite my tongue so many times during these episodes.
Now, that's not to say that after the glossary comes out, we're going to go hog wild.
Right, we will not torture you.
No, yeah, we can't do that. But every once in a while, I just think that it might be good for us
agree.
to go through a little bit of what our history of where some of these moronic things have come from.
Weird pronunciations. I mean, when we're in public, sometimes we can go on for several minutes in a conversation mispronouncing things. We both know what we're saying, and we'll like stop and look around and say to each other, like, oh my gosh, the people who are standing around us right now are probably thinking, who the hell are these two idiots?
Absolutely. That's 100% accurate and alarming in a way.
I think that would be a very nice idea.
So that'll probably be episode 5B, B as for bonus. But all right, any last words over there?
No.
Actually, I'll let you take us out this time.
Oh, well, thank you.
Because you introduced us.
Thank you. Yes. All right, everybody. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. Have a wonderful week. Stay safe. And we'll see you next time.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've just listened to Chillworthy. Thank you for joining us on this latest episode. While we strive to keep our discussions engaging and lighthearted, we also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the real lives and events that are at the heart of these stories.
We try to approach each topic with a sense of curiosity and respect, fully aware of the impact these events have had on the individuals and their loved ones. Our goal is to honor their memories by keeping their stories alive and shedding light on the mysteries that surround them.
If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, and don't forget to join us on the next episode of Chillworthy.